Comrades, look around you. Every morning you rise before the sun, trudge through the motions of a life dictated not by your desires, but by the rhythm of a machine that belongs to another. The system teaches you to measure your worth in hours and wages, to believe that your labor is a necessary sacrifice to earn the right to exist. Yet, do not be deceived, this is not necessity, it is domination. This is not freedom, it is chains disguised as routine. Your power, the very power that shapes the world, is hidden from you by habits, by clocks, by the endless repetition of tasks that serve not your life, but the accumulation of wealth in the hands of the few. Capitalism thrives not merely on exploitation of labor, but on the cultivation of ignorance. It does not need to use force at all times. It only needs to convince you that the daily grind is natural, inevitable, sacred. The system masks its theft by calling it payment for your work. Yet every coin you receive is a fragment of what you create, a token of the labor stripped from your hands. The fruits of your labor are not yours, they are taken from you, commodified and transformed into profit for those who do not lift a finger beyond the counting of gold. This is the invisible chain, the hidden cage in which you live. Workers of the world, understand this. Your alienation is not an accident, it is deliberate. You are separated from the products of your labor, from the processes of creation, from each other, and even from your own human potential. The system trains you to endure, to compete with your neighbor, to accept small comforts as substitutes for justice. Every routine you perform, every unquestioned order you follow, every necessary task is a brick in the prison of your own submission. Yet in this same labor lies your liberation. For the power to remake the world resides not in the counting houses of the wealthy, not in the speeches of politicians, but in your hands, in your collective ability to produce. Imagine the factories, the fields, the offices, the streets, filled with workers conscious of their own strength. Imagine the moment when the veil is lifted and the oppressed realize that the very system that seems to contain them is built upon their sweat, their creativity, their labor. This is the moment when routine can become resistance, when the ordinary tasks of life become the tools of revolutionary transformation. The ruling class fears your awareness more than your anger, for an awakened proletariat cannot be bribed with comfort, cannot be silenced by ideology. They manufacture divisions between worker and worker, between immigrant and native, between skilled and unskilled, so that you are unity. The only force capable of overturning this order remains unrealized. Do not fall into their trap. The enemy is not your neighbor. It is the structure that requires you to exploit and be exploited in turn. Solidarity is not optional, it is survival. Organization is not idealism, it is strategy. Class consciousness is not a theory, it is the spark that ignites revolution. We must recognize that the system is not inevitable. It is maintained by choice and by the consent of those who endure it without question. History teaches us that no structure of oppression can withstand the united force of the oppressed. The machinery of profit grinds only because you allow it to, because you have been trained to endure, to obey, and to wait for crumbs while your creativity and labor are stolen. To rise is not merely to resist it, is to reclaim what is yours, to seize control of the means of production, and to reorganize society so that labor serves life, not capital. Comrades, let us cast aside the chains of routine, the habitual acceptance of exploitation. Let us awaken to the truth that our work, our effort, our very existence is the foundation of all wealth. Let us unite across cities, across fields, across factories, across nations, and demand a world where human labor is celebrated, not commodified, where the fruits of creation belong to those who create, where society is structured not around profit but around human need and human dignity. The time for idle endurance is over. The time for conscious, collective action is now. The system hides your power behind routine, but the truth remains you are the engine of the world, the source of all wealth, the potential liberators of humanity itself. Rise, organize, and reclaim your power, for in your hands lies the possibility of a new world. Comrades, consider the life imposed upon you under the weight of the capitalist system, where every day is dictated by schedules, timetables, and the demands of production, not for your own fulfillment, but for the accumulation of wealth by a class that owns nothing but the instruments of labor. From the moment the alarm summons you to rise, your movements, your thoughts, your very existence are aligned to serve an apparatus that thrives on the subjugation of your creativity and energy. The routine that is presented to you as necessity is, in truth, a veil, a carefully constructed mechanism to conceal the vast power that resides within each of you. This routine is not harmless repetition. It is the scaffold of control, the tool by which those who profit from your work ensure that you do not recognize your capacity to reshape the world. Every task assigned, every expectation enforced, every clock watched and deadline met, is designed to channel your life force into a cycle that enriches others while keeping you in a state of unconscious compliance. You are taught to value punctuality, obedience, and consistency as virtues, while the very essence of your power, your capacity to innovate, to create, to determine the conditions of your own existence, is systematically obscured. The worker, engaged day after day in mechanical, repetitive labor, comes to internalize the impression that this life is natural, that the structures of hierarchy, supervision, and exploitation are eternal. Yet it is precisely in this routine that your power lies dormant, like a seed buried beneath layers of soil awaiting sunlight and water. Every assembly line, every ledger filled, every field tended is an expression of human capability. You are not merely following instructions, you are performing acts of creation, of transformation, of mastery over nature and society, but the capitalist system divorces you from the meaning of your labor. It tells you that your task has value only insofar as it produces surplus value for someone else, that the measure of your effort is the wage you receive, rather than the impact your work has on the world itself. Thus your own eyes are blindfolded to the truth, that the world is shaped by your hands, that the structures of production and society exist because you maintain them, and that your daily routines are proof of your latent, untapped potential. Routine is effective precisely because it normalizes this concealment. Repetition creates habits that obscure consciousness, habituating workers to accept the role assigned to them as inevitable. You rise, you work, you return home, you sleep, and you repeat. Within this cycle, questions of justice, of ownership, of possibility are deferred or dismissed. The mind, accustomed to schedules and tasks, is less likely to dwell on the origin of the products of labor, the purpose of the work, or the inequality inherent in the system. The power to shape society, which is inseparable from the act of producing life's necessities, is thus hidden not through chains or imprisonment, but through routine itself. The repetition that seems mundane, that seems natural, is in reality a sophisticated mechanism of suppression. It convinces you that survival requires acquiescence, that creativity must be subordinated to necessity, that obedience is a virtue while resistance is folly. In this way, the system ensures that your ability to transform the world remains latent, unacknowledged and untapped. But let us reflect on what is truly extraordinary every day. You demonstrate mastery over materials, processes, and systems that make human society possible. Without your labor, the economy halts. Without your effort, nothing is produced, nothing is maintained. Your daily routines, when considered in isolation, appear trivial, but when recognized as a collective force, they are the engine of civilization itself. The capitalist system does not wish for you to see this, for if you understood that each act of labor is a demonstration of power, that each routine is a reflection of your capacity to sustain and reshape the world, the foundations of domination would tremble. You do not need to wait for permission to wield influence. Your influence is inherent, exercised every time you perform work, every time you contribute to the maintenance of society, every time you make the world function through your hands and mind. It is this hidden power that routine conceals. The system trains you to see yourself as replaceable, as small, as powerless, even as it relies entirely upon your activity. The structures of oppression insist upon the illusion that labor is a burden to be endured rather than a demonstration of human capacity. In truth, your ability to organize, to innovate, to direct production toward human need rather than profit lies dormant within the very routines imposed upon you. The transformation of society, the overturning of unjust hierarchies, the creation of conditions in which work serves life rather than capital is not a distant possibility. It is encoded in the everyday practices, in the repetitive actions, in the labor that you perform without realizing its magnitude. Every day, through routine, the system conceals your power, but it cannot destroy it. That power exists, persistent and tangible, in the very fact that you sustain the world. Once you awaken to it, once you perceive the routine not as chains, but as proof of your capacity, the potential for revolutionary change becomes visible. The routine that was designed to bind you can become the instrument of liberation, for within your hands, within your collective daily effort, lies the capacity to reshape the world, to reclaim what has been hidden from you, and to transform the structures that have sought to keep you compliant. Comrades, let us not be deceived by the glittering facade of wages, by the illusions of comfort and security that are presented to us as the fruits of our own labor. Every coin you receive, every paycheck you clutch, every promotion or bonus you are promised is not a reward for your effort, but a carefully calculated portion of what you have created, stripped from you and transformed into profit for those who do not work, who do not sweat, who do not endure the weight of labor. Exploitation is not an accident, it is not an unfortunate byproduct of an imperfect system. It is deliberate, systematic, and necessary to the very survival of capitalism. The bourgeoisie do not merely benefit from your labor, they rely upon the extraction of surplus value, upon the conversion of your life's work into capital that compounds, accumulates and dominates. They have constructed an elaborate architecture of inequality that convinces you that what is stolen from you is somehow fair, that the conditions imposed upon you are natural, inevitable and deserved. Your exploitation is hidden beneath the comforting rhetoric of wages, contracts, and employment agreements, but the truth is stark and undeniable. Every day, the system takes from you what is yours, and gives back only what it chooses, never enough, always less than the measure of your contribution. The illusion of comfort is a cunning tool in the hands of the ruling class. It is a distraction, a sedative, a means of teaching you to endure injustice without question. The modern worker may live in a house, eat meals prepared by others, or possess a modest degree of security. And in this, the system whispers that life under capitalism is generous, that labor is rewarded with dignity and ease. Yet this comfort is purchased with the very essence of your being. Your health, your time, your creativity, your potential, all are extracted in the service of accumulation. The treadmill of modern life, the pressures of deadlines, the stress of competition, the anxiety of job insecurity, these are the hidden costs, the taxes that are never calculated, the invisible forms of coercion that ensure you continue to labor even when what you gain seems adequate. In reality, comfort is the mask of domination, designed to keep you compliant and to make exploitation appear voluntary. It teaches you to accept deprivation as normal and theft as just. Capitalism thrives on this deception because it depends upon the continual transfer of labor into profit. The wage is not equivalent to the value produced, it is always less. The difference, the surplus value, is the essence of exploitation. When you construct goods, manage systems, tend fields, or operate machinery, you create far more value than is ever returned to you. That difference, which you do not see and are not allowed to claim, becomes capital invested, compounded, and accumulated by those who own the instruments of production. It is deliberate, not incidental, that labor is separated from its results. The worker is alienated not only from the product, but from the process, from their fellow workers, and from themselves, so that exploitation can continue unquestioned. By presenting wages as fair compensation and comfort as the fruit of merit, the system conceals the truth that labor is the source of all wealth, and that wealth is systematically stolen from those who create it. This extraction is sustained not merely through economic mechanisms, but through ideology, through culture, through the normalization of hierarchy. Schools teach obedience, workplaces teach conformity, media teaches aspiration toward status and consumption, all to ensure that the worker internalizes the logic of exploitation. You are led to believe that your labor is exchanged fairly, that comfort is earned, and that the wealth of others is a result of merit or intelligence, rather than the deliberate appropriation of what you produce. Exploitation is embedded in the very fabric of social relations. It is reinforced in every transaction, every contract, every legal framework that treats property as sacred and labor as disposable. You are taught to admire your oppressors, to envy them, to emulate them, while never questioning the structural injustice that allows one class to prosper at the expense of another. Yet let us recognize the profound truth within this deliberate injustice. The capacity for liberation exists precisely in the knowledge of exploitation. The system cannot function without labor, cannot exist without extraction, cannot accumulate wealth without appropriation. Every act of work is a demonstration of power. Every contribution is proof of the indispensable role of the worker in sustaining society. Once you see wages and comfort for what they are, temporary illusions designed to mask theft, you begin to recognize your own strength, your own agency, your own ability to reclaim what is yours. Awareness is the first step, and organization is the next. If labor were to withhold itself, to act collectively in recognition of its exploitation, the entire edifice of wealth accumulation would collapse. For profit depends entirely upon the deliberate extraction of your creative power. Exploitation is deliberate, and therefore it can be resisted. Wages are illusions, comfort is deception, and profit is the product of your labor, stolen and concentrated in the hands of the few. Understanding this truth is not pessimism, it is clarity. It is the foundation of action, the rationale for solidarity, the moral imperative for revolution. The deliberate theft of labor is the system's greatest strength and also its greatest vulnerability, for within the very act of exploitation lies the potential for liberation, the blueprint for reclaiming the fruits of our labor and constructing a society where work serves life, not profit. Comrades, understand that the condition of labor under capitalism is not merely one of exploitation, but of profound alienation. The worker does not simply toil for wages or endure long hours. The worker is severed from the essence of their own activity, from the products they create, and from the collective power that arises from shared labor. Alienation is the cornerstone of domination, the invisible force that prevents the oppressed from recognizing their true strength. When you labor, the work you perform is not for yourself, but for the benefit of those who own the instruments of production. The factory, the office, the field all become spaces in which your human capacity is appropriated, transformed into objects and commodities over which you have no control. You do not possess the product of your labor. It is taken, sold, exchanged, and converted into profit for another, while you receive only a fraction in wages, an amount entirely divorced from the value you have produced. In this separation, the laborer is estranged not only from the object created, but from the act of creation itself, which should be the most human and fulfilling expression of agency. Work, which could be a source of identity and pride, becomes instead a mechanism of control, a repetitive motion that trains the mind to obey, not to innovate, to endure, not to question, to accept, not to resist. This alienation extends beyond the product of labor. It permeates the process itself. The worker does not determine the conditions, the methods, or the purposes of their labor. Every movement, every decision, every effort is subordinated to the demands of capital. The instructions come from managers, the goals are set by shareholders, the pace is dictated by profit margins. In this way, the worker becomes a cog in a machine, a function rather than a creator, a fragment of a system rather than an autonomous human being. The joy of mastery, the satisfaction of problem-solving, the pride of contributing meaningfully to the world, these are denied, replaced instead by monotony, repetition, and the constant pressure of oversight. Each day reinforces the sense of powerlessness, for the laborer experiences the product as something external, alien, and unattainable. The separation from one's own work is not an accident of labor. It is the deliberate imposition of capitalism, designed to render the worker compliant, obedient, and incapable of conceiving a life outside the logic of exploitation. Moreover, alienation isolates the worker from others. Capitalism thrives on the fragmentation of the collective. Competition is instilled as natural, envy is cultivated as virtue, and collaboration is subordinated to the pursuit of individual advancement within the hierarchy imposed by the ruling class. Co-workers who share the same condition of exploitation are transformed from potential allies into rivals, preventing the formation of solidarity and the recognition of collective strength. The bonds that could arise from shared labor and shared struggle are replaced with division, mistrust, and a sense of individual insufficiency. The worker comes to perceive themselves as alone, powerless, and dependent, rather than as part of a class capable of exerting decisive influence over the conditions of society. Alienation, therefore, is not only the estrangement from labor and its products, but also the estrangement from fellow human beings, the very beings whose unity could challenge oppression and reshape the world. This fragmentation has profound consequences. It teaches resignation, discourages imagination, and normalizes suffering. The worker internalizes the limitations imposed upon them, believing that creativity and autonomy are luxuries rather than rights. The sense of disconnection from one's own labor breeds a corresponding disconnection from oneself, a form of psychological coercion that ensures the perpetuation of exploitation. You are trained to value the approval of supervisors more than the integrity of your work, to accept the dictates of management more than the dictates of your own judgment, to measure success in compliance rather than in contribution. In every factory, office, and field, this alienation manifests, rendering resistance more difficult because it obscures the very possibility of power, the possibility that collective action can overturn the structures of oppression. Within this alienation lies a hidden truth. The source of all wealth, the source of all production, lies in your hands. The separation is artificial, constructed by a system that fears the unity of the laboring class. If the worker recognizes that the products of their labor, the processes they maintain, are the connections they could form with one another, are the foundations of society itself, the potential for liberation becomes apparent. Alienation is not a permanent state. It is a condition imposed to suppress consciousness and solidarity. The recognition of this estrangement, the understanding of how labor, products, and social bonds have been separated, is the first step toward reclaiming control, toward rebuilding connections, and toward transforming submission into collective strength. Comrades, the most formidable weapon of the oppressed is not isolated resistance, not individual defiance, but unity. Under capitalism, the ruling class seeks to divide and conquer, to scatter the strength of labor into fragments that can be controlled, exploited, and pitted against one another. They cultivate jealousy, competition, and mistrust, convincing each worker that their struggle is personal, that their hardships are unique, that their liberation depends upon individual cunning or endurance rather than collective action. Yet history and reason alike reveal that no oppression can endure where the oppressed recognize their shared condition and act together. Class consciousness is the spark that illuminates the path from exploitation to liberation, and collective organization is the engine that transforms that illumination into tangible change. To see oneself as a member of a broader class of laborers, to understand that your struggle is inseparable from the struggles of millions, is to awaken to the revolutionary potential that lies dormant in every exploited hand and mind. Capitalism thrives because it masks the reality of interdependence, convincing workers that their fate is their own, and that solidarity is optional, sentimental, or even dangerous. The ruling class wages ideological warfare, teaching that individual success is the measure of worth, that competition is natural, and that loyalty to others is secondary to personal advancement. In doing so, they fragment the collective power of labor and render the majority incapable of challenging structures built on their own activity. But the moment the worker recognizes that exploitation is systemic, that wages are merely a fraction of the value produced, that alienation is imposed deliberately, the potential for unity becomes undeniable. Class consciousness is the awakening to this reality. It is the recognition that the struggles of the individual are inseparable from the struggles of all who labor under similar conditions, that the chains imposed upon one are chains imposed upon all, and that liberation is achievable only through collective action. Organization is the practical expression of this consciousness. To unite, to strategize, to coordinate, to act in unison is to transform latent power into force capable of reshaping society. Labor unions, worker councils, and other forms of collective organization are not merely bureaucratic constructs. They are the vehicles by which the exploited seize control of their own destiny. When workers act together, they disrupt the mechanisms of capitalist accumulation. They assert that production cannot continue without their consent, and they demonstrate that the illusion of inevitability that sustains domination is false. Strikes, collective bargaining, mutual aid, and coordinated resistance are not acts of charity or negotiation. They are acts of power, asserting the principle that the creators of wealth cannot be ignored, suppressed, or replaced without consequences. The more systematically organized the workers are, the more complete their understanding of their shared interests, the more formidable they become against the entrenched structures of exploitation. Unity is not mere assembly, it is conscious solidarity. It requires an understanding that the liberation of one worker is bound to the liberation of all. It demands education, dialogue, and a rejection of the divisions that have been imposed by the ruling class. Workers must recognize that differences of skill, occupation, nationality, gender, or race are not natural obstacles to solidarity but tools of oppression deliberately used to prevent the formation of a united front. Only through conscious recognition of shared exploitation and shared interests can the proletariat transform disparate grievances into a collective struggle capable of challenging and overturning the system. Solidarity transforms vulnerability into strength, disperses fear, and creates a sense of purpose and identity that no wage or illusion of comfort can undermine. History confirms this revolutionary truth. Every major transformation, every social advance, every moment in which the oppressed have altered the conditions of their lives has depended upon the recognition of shared interests and the ability to act collectively. The bourgeoisie understand this instinctively, which is why they seek to isolate, distract, and deceive. They fear not the individual who complains or endures quietly, but the masses that move as one, coordinated in thought and action, conscious of their own indispensability, and unyielding in their demands for justice. The consciousness of class and the practice of unity are inseparable. One is intellectual clarity, the other is material force, and together they form the foundation of revolutionary change. Comrades, the power of unity lies not in rhetoric or sentiment, but in the practical ability to assert control over production, to negotiate, to resist, to disrupt, and to reconstruct society. When workers recognize themselves as a class, when they organize collectively, when they act consciously in pursuit of shared goals, they demonstrate that capitalism's power depends entirely upon the compliance of those it exploits. Unity is revolutionary because it transforms latent strength into decisive action. It converts numbers into leverage, awareness into strategy, and solidarity into liberation. The oppressed are capable of reclaiming the world they sustain, but only when they understand that their individual struggles are inseparable from the collective struggle, and that only together can they overturn a system built upon their own subjugation. Comrades, the true source of wealth, the engine of civilization, and the foundation of every society is labor. It is labor that transforms raw materials into necessities, comforts, and innovations. It is labor that sustains cities, fields, factories, and homes. It is labor that makes society function. Yet under the present system, labor is estranged from its power. It is expropriated, appropriated, and converted into profit for a minority who have never labored, who own only property and capital, and who live by consuming the product of others' toil. The working class, by virtue of its activity, possesses the capacity to create, sustain, and reshape the world. This capacity is the kernel of liberation. The moment the worker recognizes that all wealth is generated through labor, that nothing exists in society that is not produced by human effort, the artificial hierarchies imposed by capital begin to crumble. The wealth that the ruling class hoards is not their own, it is the accumulation of stolen labor. To reclaim it is not theft, it is justice, the restoration of what rightfully belongs to those who generate it. Seizing control of production is not merely an economic act, it is the assertion of sovereignty over life itself. To own the factories, fields, offices, and workshops where society's needs are met is to assert that the worker is no longer subordinate to the dictates of profit, but the arbiter of what is necessary for human survival and flourishing. When labor governs production, decisions are made not according to the accumulation of capital, but according to the satisfaction of social needs. The tools and processes that once served a class of exploiters are redirected toward human benefit. Food is produced not for scarcity, but for nourishment. Housing is built not for speculation, but for security. Education, health, and culture are created not for profit, but for human development. In seizing control of production, the working class does not merely alter the distribution of material goods. It reclaims the very power to define the organization of society, the purpose of work, and the measure of wealth. Redistribution is the necessary companion to control over production. Labor creates more than what is needed by each individual. It produces surplus, value beyond immediate subsistence. Under capitalism, this surplus is expropriated and concentrated in the hands of the few. Under the governance of labor, this surplus becomes the instrument of social justice. To redistribute wealth is not to reward idleness, but to return to the producers the fruits of their own labor. It is to ensure that the collective effort of society serves the collective good rather than the enrichment of a detached elite. Redistribution corrects the imbalance of power, reconnects the worker with the products of their activity, and creates the material foundation for equality, freedom, and human development. It is a practical recognition that the social character of labor demands a social use of wealth, that what is created collectively belongs collectively, and that the liberation of labor is inseparable from the liberation of society. This process of reclamation is inherently revolutionary because it overturns the fundamental relationship of capital and labor. Capitalism relies upon the subordination of labor, the extraction of surplus value, and the illusion that wealth is generated by those who own property rather than by those who labor. By taking control, the working class severs this chain of dependence. The factories, offices, fields, and workshops no longer serve private profit. They become instruments of collective empowerment. In doing so, the worker transforms from a passive participant in the system to an active agent of social reconstruction. This is not an abstract or distant possibility. It is encoded in the daily acts of labor that sustain society, in the collective knowledge, skill, and creativity that the working class already possesses. The machinery, the expertise, the coordination, and the innovation are all present. What is required is the consciousness to recognize and wield this power. The act of reclaiming labor and wealth is also an ethical imperative. Capitalist exploitation treats human beings as means rather than ends, measuring lives in wages, hours, and productivity. Reclaiming control of production re-establishes the primacy of human need and human dignity. Work becomes meaningful not because it produces profit for a few, but because it sustains life, fosters creativity, and builds society. Wealth is measured not by accumulation in vaults, but by the well-being, freedom, and flourishing of all. The liberation of labor is liberation of humanity itself, for the worker is both the creator of wealth, the bearer of society's potential. Comrades, labor is the source of all power, and the moment the working class seizes control over production and redistributes the wealth it generates, the structures of exploitation begin to collapse. The tools of oppression become instruments of liberation. The alienation of work is reversed. The fruits of human activity are returned to those who create them. Liberation is not a gift, a concession, or a negotiation. It is the rightful reclamation of power, the transformation of society from one built on theft and hierarchy to one built on justice, equality, and the recognition of human dignity. Comrades, we have seen with clarity how the system conceals your power, how it appropriates your labor, how it alienates you from your work, from one another, and from your own potential. We have seen that the chains of routine, the illusions of wages and comfort, and the divisions imposed by the ruling class are not natural or inevitable. They are deliberate instruments of control. And yet, within this oppression lies the source of your liberation. The laborer creates all wealth, sustains all society, and holds in their hands the power to transform the world. The path forward is no longer obscured. It lies in consciousness, in solidarity, and in action. Class awareness is the spark, unity is the flame, and organization is the force that can shatter the foundations of exploitation. The working class, when united and conscious of its own indispensability, can reclaim the means of production, redistribute wealth, and reconstruct society according to human need rather than private profit. This is not mere theory or aspiration, it is the recognition of a truth encoded in every act of labor, in every product, in every system that functions by human effort. The moment has come to reject complacency, to break free from the illusions that chain us, and to transform our daily work from an instrument of submission into a tool of revolution. The world you sustain is the world you can remake. The power is yours, latent yet undeniable. To recognize it, to organize it, and to wield it collectively is to open the door to justice, equality, and human dignity. The system may hide your power behind routine, may cloak exploitation in comfort, and may fragment you into isolation, but together, conscious and united, the laboring class can reclaim what is theirs and build a society where labor serves life, not profit, and where humanity finally governs its own destiny.